introduction, and I also want to say thank you to all of you for giving me the opportunity to come and speak to you this afternoon. And I can't tell you exactly how exciting this is because I've never been to a UK Internet Governance Forum before, but I have been to the US ones, and what I will tell you is that they're not nearly as polite as you are. So I just wanted to set that context to start with. So I have 15 minutes, and what I have to say, I could spend the entire day talking to all of you. But I'm going to keep it very short and punchy so that you can get on to the next points of what you want to talk about. But I do want to talk a little bit about the things that we're seeing in the United States and that I see on a global basis, because like one of the other gentlemen who was in one of the sessions I was in earlier, we do have a bit of an international perspective on the internet and what's happening with the internet and what's happening on the governance levels of the internet. And just to start this, let me ask a question. How many of you in this room have a Facebook page? That's more than I thought. That's actually very cool.
Old fuddy-duddy.
No, I was going to say you're fuddy-duddies. How many of you update your Facebook page once a week? Wow, that's impressive. Okay, how many of you update your Facebook page once a day? Okay, well, you know, it's getting smaller and smaller. How many of you update your Facebook page once a month? Okay. Part of the reason I ask you that question is when you go on and you update your Facebook page, do you ever worry about somebody coming in and using the information you're putting on your Facebook page and using it inappropriately or taking it somewhere or becoming you someplace else? Does that ever bother you? No, of course not. You never think about that, right? Well, part of the reason I wanted to bring that up is that from my perspective and from what we're seeing in the marketplace, one of the big gigantic elephants in the room as it relates to the internet is identity. Is knowing who is out there, who it is that you're dealing with, who it is that you're interacting with, and your identity and how your identity is being parsed out in that space. And one of the things about that whole identity piece is one of the things that you're talking about, but you aren't necessarily calling it this, which is this whole concept of giving people access to the internet, giving them access to the ability to do different things in that space. All of that ties back to who is it, and how is that person going to be recognized and protected, and how is their information going to be protected, and how are their activities going to be protected. And guess what? That isn't something that's bounded by geography. It's not something that's bounded by where you're using the computer or where you're accessing it. Your identity, once you put it in the electronic world, is no longer UK, no longer American, no longer anything out there. You're out there. And so one of the big issues from a governance perspective, as you think about the future of the internet, and as you think about governance issues around the internet, and as you're thinking about your end clients and your end users, is how you're going to protect those identities. And how you're going to do it in a way that works both ways from a protection perspective. How are you going to protect the integrity of your identity? And how are you going to make certain that other people can't tamper with it? So that you always are you, and that the people that are dealing with you always know that you're you. So that's the first thing that I want to communicate, is you're thinking about your strategy and your agenda. Identity is core to everything you're doing, and you should mix it in with your discussions and your thoughts about the services that are being offered. That's the first one, and the identity does not have any boundaries. Two, the second thought I'd like to put out there for you to think about is what we call, and what we've noticed out there, is the concept of accountability. And I was in a session this morning with members of the UK government who were talking to a group of banks, and they're looking for ways to solve the problem of identity and figuring out who it is that's going to vouch for you in the electronic world. So one of the benefits of the electronic world, as you all know, is you can do things in the electronic world that you may not be able to do in the physical world, but you also want to do many of the things you do in the physical world in the electronic world. And in order to do that, you have to have some way of making certain, again, that I'm really Karen Wendel and not somebody else. And you need somebody to vouch for that. You need to have accountability around it, and you need to be able to trust it. And so one of the things that we've been looking at and seeing a lot of activity around is in this crazy, free-form kind of world that is the internet, who has accountability? Who owns that responsibility? Who is going to stand behind those assertions? Because on Facebook, with all due respect to the gentlemen and ladies in this room who are updating your Facebook, there's nobody out there checking the accuracy of what you're putting on your Facebook. There's nobody out there checking to make certain that you really are who you say you are, and that you've really done the things that you've done. And it really doesn't usually matter in the Facebook context, unless, of course, you get into an unpleasant social situation. But it doesn't really matter that much. But when you're talking about things where you're interfacing on, there was a gentleman who was talking earlier about healthcare, or you're talking about your interfaces for tax purposes, or you're talking about sharing sensitive legal documents, suddenly there has to be accountability about those transactions. And a lot of the things that are going on from a governance perspective in the internet world tend to push out that accountability, and it gets dispersed. And so the second message I want to convey to you is, from a governance perspective, is there has to be accountability. And that accountability doesn't have to be centralized in this big, gigantic Death Star up in the sky. It can be parsed out into pockets, much like what you do today here in the UK, with groups that are responsible for particular sets of activities. You can distribute the authority, you can distribute the accountability, but it still needs to exist. So that's the second point, is accountability. The third concept is the concept of what I would call the law of unintended consequences. And we see this a lot in the internet space, where people do things with the best of intentions, and they leverage technology in ways that, again, have the best of intentions to begin with, but the consequences are not necessarily always what they think they would like it to be. So all of you are probably familiar with the brouhaha that came up from Google going out and doing the Street View, where people objected to the fact that you could suddenly see where your boss was living by just clicking on his address. Or they objected to the fact that you could get visibility into a particular shop, or who was going in and out of the shop. So something that seemed like a really good idea to a group of engineers in California didn't necessarily have that same level of excitement from the people who were living it. Let me give you another example that's very real and very tangible right now. During the activities in Tunisia over the course of the last month or so, one of the things that, again, using an example that is very real and that you guys can probably relate to, is Facebook. What they were doing on Facebook is they were actually doing algorithms on the pictures of the people who were putting their faces up on Facebook, and using those algorithms to identify you, to make certain it was really you when you were coming back online, so that you weren't getting police informants who were coming in pretending to be you on Facebook and interacting with people. Now, that may sound like a really groovy idea, right? Oh, great, now I know that nobody else is going to go on and be Karen Wendel, but stop and think about that for just a minute. Somebody now has the measurements of my face and the structure of my face, and it's stored in an algorithm inside Facebook that Facebook is then using to make connections. And somebody can steal that, and it's not like I can go and get a new face. I mean, unless I'm Lady Gaga, but it's not like I can go out and get a brand new face, and it's not like I can go back to Facebook and say, well, no, that's not really my face. It is my face. But they didn't think about the unintended consequences of the use of a technology in an environment that was viral. So the third point I want to make, is as we're all thinking about these really fantastic things that we're doing in the internet, we need adults. We need people who think about these things. And the people that are the adults who are thinking about these things are people like the people in this room. Because you're the ones who are living with the consequences. You're the ones who are experiencing the ups and downs that are happening in this space. And so as that group, it behooves people like the people in this room to be thinking about those three things that I mentioned. The concept that identity is key and core to the internet and the internet experience, and that it has no boundaries, no borders, no geographies. Two, the concept that there has to be a level of accountability in terms of the people that are interacting in this space. That doesn't need to diminish the creativity, but there does have to be a source of trust and the anchor of trust. And most people know that that probably isn't going to be a government, because governments have a way of kind of, getting where they shouldn't be. So, no offense to the governments, or people feel that way. So it's probably not going to be a government, so it needs to be combinations of entities, and this is one of them. And then the third thing is avoid the laws of unintended consequences, of rushing into things before thinking about all of the things that can happen there. By doing that in groups like this, and like the ones that I participated in the United States and others that I've been in other countries like Singapore and New Zealand and Australia, these kinds of groups are doing the kinds of things that the internet was built to do, which is bringing the energy and enthusiasm of multiple groups of people together and finding ways to solve the types of things that need to be solved. And I think that by doing this, even though I was supposed to talk about financial services and transactions and all those other kinds of things, I think this is actually more core and important to what this is all about. So thank you very much. And I made it in 15.